Well, Santa Claus has come, Santa Claus has gone. The ball dropped in Times Square, and we are back, baby. Back from the holiday break here on the OHL podcast. We certainly hope your holidays were good to you, and just wanted to start with a quick shout out to our friends at TPH Academy, one of these great places. There are more and more of them around, and TPH now has campuses in 18 different cities. You can study, you can train, you can play, all under the TPH umbrella. They sent me some swag. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, you can see it for yourself. Let me just shift off the mic there for a second so you can see the logo, the TPH logo better. If you're not watching on YouTube and you couldn't see that, please consider your life choices. We have a YouTube channel. You should follow it. You should subscribe to it. You should be a part of our YouTube community. And thanks to TPH Academy for the awesome hoodie that I now might just wear every single day until it stinks like a hockey bag. Because isn't that what you want? Dan Mahar is that guy chuckling at my smelly self on the other end of this call. How did the holidays treat you, Dansky?
Not bad. It's too quick as always, and
As
yeah,
always.
got the hoodie as myself as well. It's been hoodie weather lately, so yeah, you get good value out of the hoodies this time of year.
Certainly do that. And I will wear the TPH logo with pride. Really appreciate them thinking of me as the holidays. I kind of needed it. Maybe I can wear, because the TPH logo does look like a shield, I can wear it as a shield because in the episode just before Christmas, I shared on this podcast, Dan, my three favorite logos in the league. And since that time, I have not just received the hate mail via our inbox, ohlpodcast at Rogers.com. I have been asked bluntly if I've been dropped on my head. My media kit that waits for me in media rooms around the league has been soiled. People wrote things on it because they so disagreed with my choices. To recap briefly, if you missed it before Christmas, Dan and I said we were going to do this. I gave an honorable mention to the Brantford Bulldogs, probably because I like dogs a whole lot. But I think that's a pretty cool logo with the dog chomping the bone. My third favorite, the Saginaw Spirit. I like the Americana of it. And I might still be remembering the Stephen Colbert mascot days when he kind of adopted the team. In second place for me, the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. Clean, crisp, classic look to it, particularly the red sweater with the white logo. And then number one for me, the Peterborough Petes. Again, clean, easy, classic, my absolute favorite. And I took the Kitchener Rangers out because I figure, there's probably a bias. Not only did I grow up in the city, but it's the team I cover. So I left the Rangers out, but also love the classic script of the Kitchener Rangers. So my three picks, the Petes first, the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds second, the Saginaw Spirit third, with an honorable mention to the Brantford Bulldogs. I have taken my shots since that time, Dan. Why don't you take this opportunity to share with the class because I just want it all to be directed at you now. You see,
Yep,
hear that
yep.
sound? Beep,
Yeah, I was
beep,
gonna say after that
beep.
intro, yeah, so you just like throwing me right under the bus, right? So
Exactly. And I'm backing it over you, pal. Backing it right over you. Your three favorite logos are,
all right, I'll have to with a quick qualifier because I did the
of
same. I
course,
eliminated the Kitchener Rangers because I figured it's derivative of the New York Rangers when they were affiliated, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm generally not a huge fan of the cartoony animals biting hockey stick type thing, so that will preface my choices. But I am a huge aviation buff, Mike. I love aviation. So you throw a Spitfire in your logo, and it's going to get on my list, and that's why I have Windsor at number 3. Just love the old Spitfire, World War II hero in itself. So I got Windsor number 3. Number 2 is the one cartoony exception I make, but I have to give the Sudbury Wolves a nod with that classic wolf, blood hungry wolf dripping from its teeth. Just a classic logo, if you ask me. It's the puck I always wanted to get when I was a kid. So, and then my number one logo, Mike, is one where we overlap somewhat. I had to give it to the Sioux Greyhounds. That classic slender greyhound in the red circle, just like you said, clean, classic. Everybody loves when it comes to town. So those are my 3.
those are excellent choices and good reasons for them all around. It's funny that you talk about the cartoony logos and maybe not being a big fan, nor am I, although I made the exception with the Bulldogs as an honorable mention. And I think Saginaw is a little bit more cartoony. But one of the people that was upset with me for my choices pointed to the Sarnia Sting as a great example of a logo. And I'm not trying to whiz all over
Mhm.
Sarnia here, but come on with the cartoon B. Give me a break. Give me a
So,
break.
actually, Mike, surprisingly, Sarnia was on my short list. I actually really do like how sharp it looks on, but I hate wasps, Mike. I hate wasps, so no.
That's probably why. Deep in my heart of hearts, that's probably why I left the Sarnia Sting off. It's pretty subjective, but just remember this week when you are emailing OHL podcast at Rogers.com or you're tweeting or Xing at us at Dan Mahar or at Farwell underscore OHL, direct everything to Dan. His number one logo is the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. Okay. His number two logo in the league, I've forgotten already. You had
Sudbury
Spitfires
Wolves.
at number 3,
Yeah,
Sudbury
yeah.
Wolves were number 2. I liked the green Sudbury better, but I'm so old and old school. However, so you've got with Dan, you've got Sioux, Sudbury, and Windsor as his top 3. Have at him. I'm tired of hearing your crap, okay? Leave me alone. Your New Year's resolution should be to be nicer to me. Okay, don't do that. We don't expect niceties on this show. Not at
Well,
all.
Mike, you don't want to hear what my honorable mention would have been because that's going to probably get me more flack. So,
No, bring it on then. Let's go. I've told you I'm done with it. It's your
all
turn.
right, my honorable mention was the Flint Firebirds. I something about that logo and the color scheme being original. I actually just, I don't mind that one. So,
I would take a Firebird, the vehicle, which is, where that color scheme comes from, over the Firebirds logo. But isn't that interesting? We're quite different on that. Although we overlap with the Sioux, I don't dig Sudbury much at all. I definitely don't dig Sarnia, which was on your short list. I don't dig Flint. Windsor, I like the way they've refreshed it in recent years. Like it looks pretty sharp. There's no question about it.
yeah, and you wouldn't let me pick the old classic Belleville Bulls. So, but that strong looking bull right there to me, that's number one if it ever comes back.
Yeah, not too cartoony at all. I gotcha. Okay, okay. Let's move on with more pressing matters, and I think the most pressing of them all, Dan, is the consternation that hockey fans in Canada are still feeling after an incredibly disappointing World Junior performance again. Back-to-back years out in the quarterfinals. What in the hell is going on with hockey in this country?
Well, you know me, Mike. I've been a little bit of an open critic of Hockey Canada for quite some time now for a variety of reasons. We all know that these national hockey organizations have their inherent biases, they have their programs, they stick by them. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think there's a lot to criticize here with Hockey Canada, and there's been a lot of kind of we'll call them pedestrian outings lately for the World Junior team for Canada. And I mean, you get a year with Connor Bedard, things kind of get smoothed over. But let's not forget they needed an overtime goal from him just to beat Slovakia that year. So there's a lot wrong, I think, with the selection process, and I don't want to pile on, be redundant with a lot of what we've heard on social media the last few days, but when you leave the likes of Michael Misa, Beckett Seneca, Carter Yukemchuk, Zane Perek, and when you leave that quality of offensive talent at home, you better be darn sure what you're bringing is going to get you there. And I don't think anyone was, and clearly Hockey Canada wasn't. And the main point I would make, I think, is a fairly obvious one, is just that Canada's advantage over these other countries is that wealth of high end skill. If you willingly do not take it, you are willingly giving up your advantage. And you are now taking a bunch of players who, good in their own right, are now more equivalent to what some of these other countries can offer. When you watch Team Finland play, when you watch Czechia play, they have a lot of these 200-foot workers, smart players, which is great. But they didn't have that high end skill, and they were probably quite content to see Canada left theirs at home as well.
So your point is well taken on the talent that was not taken to the tournament for Canada. And one of our regular loyal listeners in Saginaw, shout out to Ted, thanks for following along, pointed out on our YouTube channel, he can't wait to hear what we have to say now because prior to the tournament, I was taking a high level view of this saying, listen, I think there's a strong case for Michael Misa. I think there's a strong case for Zane Perek, but I'm not the one watching every player all the time. I will trust Hockey Canada in its decisions. But Ted, being a Saginaw fan, would obviously make the case for Misa, Perek, and others would make the case for players on their favorite teams. I also said before this tournament, if you are saying that, for example, Michael Misa was a snub for not being selected for the team, then you are going to snub somebody else's favorite player or, pet project, if you will, because if Misa makes the team, somebody that did make it isn't going to make it. And there's going to be a group of fans saying, well, now our guy's being snubbed. That being what it is. In the aftermath of another disappointing tournament, these are exactly the conversations we can be having. And I will give Scott Salmon some credit here, the head of Hockey Canada, for stepping up and admitting the disappointment here, that it is unacceptable. And I think indicating, Dan, that there is a willingness to change. I'm with you when it comes to the high end skill that we have a wealth of when it comes to hockey players in this country. And I have been saying for years, we need to stop overthinking this and trying to build some kind of team with this role player, that role player, and constructing a roster. What we should do, and have always should have done, in my opinion, is take the very best players that we have, put them into the lineup, and tell them what you want them to do. Because they are such good players, they will figure it out. So two things really struck me at no three things really struck me at this tournament. One, the lack of offense generally. That was incredibly surprising slash disappointing. Two, and connected to that, is the power play, which was not powerful in the least. And number three, and I might say this as an excuse, if you will, for everybody that thinks this guy, that guy, or the other guy got snubbed. Team Canada self-destructed in this tournament with their complete and utter lack of discipline. I don't care how skilled the player is. I don't care who's coaching the team. If the players go on the ice and perform with that lack of discipline, you ain't winning a tournament like this no matter what happens.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I know a lot of people were up in arms about, well, that wasn't a major, that wasn't a penalty, but it's IIHF, and this has been going on for 40 years. We know what's getting called, and you can't put yourselves in positions where those calls could be made, where those players are sidestepping an open ice hit. At the end of the game, when you're making that hit along the boards, you've got to lay off there. And I know it's not what you would do in your league. I know that, but it's not your league. It's IAHF, and you know that these things, there's a risk for them being called. We saw Sweden go down the same way in their semifinal. Lots can happen when you leave it in the hands of the officials. So you've got to be smarter. And yeah, Mike, we heard them talk about discipline, but every time they took the ice again, we just didn't see that discipline. We still saw sticks and feet. We still saw them attempting ill-advised hits. So there's a mental aspect here too that they have to take ownership over, for sure. But I think part of it is when you take a lot of players that are billed as being tough, physical, shut down, grinding type players, they think that's what's expected of them, and they're taught finish every hit, do this, do that. I think what we see in World Juniors is it's really a skill game. It's a speed and skill game. And you've got to play that game. You've got to stop thinking old school Canada 1970s, 80s hockey, and you got to start getting with the times because you can do it. You have the players to do it. You just got to adapt your mentality.
So it would be fair to say, and again, not to make excuses for what was a huge disappointment, and in the words of Scott Salmon, the head of Hockey Canada himself, unacceptable. But we must acknowledge here in Canada, where we love the game and it is our passion, that the rest of the world has absolutely caught up. But to your point earlier, Dan, with the talent pool we have to draw from, we should still be, if not head and shoulders, at least head above everybody else when it comes to the breadth or the depth of talent that we can find in this country. And I had the chance to talk with Mike Keenan not too long ago when his book came out, Iron Mike, My Life Behind the Bench. And he talked, obviously, a former coach in this league with the Peterborough Petes, and he talked about his time with Team Canada. And he said, you can't teach Canada. You can't teach what that means. It just is what it is. I think there's still a little bit of room, Dan, for the kind of 70s and 80s hockey you referred to. I think we need a little bit of that swagger, if not a little bit of that intimidation. But to Mike Keenan's quote, "You can't teach Canada," I think maybe we need to remind ourselves what it means to be a Canadian hockey player and what this game means to the very fabric of the country.
Well, it's a definitely a fair point. There's that element to the game. Absolutely. Absolutely is part of it. But I think when you're getting in that vein of what you can't teach, it's really hard to teach goal scoring when you need a goal. You take the kids that you know can do that because you can get them to play defense. You can get them to commit to the 200-foot game. But when you need that goal, you can't just pull a 200-foot face-off guy and say, we need a goal, go get it. And I think when you look at the mentality that the Americans have, you look at a player like Cole Eiserman, who they had as the 13th forward, flawed hockey player, not a great 200-foot player. Have him on the roster because when you need a goal, guess who can get you one? And he's done it several times this tournament. So I think the hardest part is when you're in those tight games late and you need a goal. Where's it going to come from? And when you leave those kids at home, my point is you better know what you're doing because there's been a few tournaments now you haven't got the goal when you need it.
There is a reckoning to be done in Canada for sure. I have little doubt that we will find our way. I say we, the collective we in Canada. No disrespect to our American listeners and those from the rest of the world as well. But we here in Canada take this very personally. And I have no doubt that the reckoning will lead to better performances down the road. I don't think it'll happen overnight, though, either. It may be a little bit of time on our way back to that gold medal status. And then to say nothing of 5 gold medals in a row, which Team Canada has managed to do in the past as well. Okay, this is the OHL podcast, of course, and still to come. Video review as it should be, and 20 teams. We have eyes on all of them. The wraparound is also coming up on this episode of the OHL podcast. It is the most wonderful time of the year for getting in on all the hoops, football, and hockey action at DraftKings Sportsbook. In the season of giving, we are being gifted college football and basketball, pro football and basketball, and pro hockey too, almost 24/7. And here is a gift for all new customers. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. When you bet just $5. Happy holidays from DraftKings. The crown is yours. And we like to take a look around the entire Ontario Hockey League each and every week on this podcast, a little something that we do so that no matter what city you're listening from or what team you are a fan of, you'll get a little tidbit. I want to touch on my opportunity to be in those arenas and in those markets as well. Starting in Sudbury, where I was between Christmas and New Year's on a road trip with the Rangers. And what an interesting experience it was in our broadcast booth to be right next to a couple of the off ice officials who happened to be working video review. And as luck would have it, from my perspective, there were a couple of reviews in that game. And look, I'm sure this is the way it's supposed to happen in every rink. It's not perfect. Nobody, or I wouldn't say everybody is an absolute expert in it, but to be able to watch it as closely as I did. So the reviews happening down at the timekeeper's bench, as we always see, the officials are on the iPads, etc., and they get on the phone. And so the other end of that phone was right beside me in the broadcast booth. And I could tell from watching the lips of the official on the ice, they were asking for the video to be moved to this spot or that spot. And these two guys right beside us in the broadcast booth were shifting that video to whatever they were asking for, sending it back downstairs. Again, I know this is the way it's supposed to work, but it worked flawlessly in Sudbury that night we were there. And it was just, I loved the perspective to be looking down on the ice, watching the officials watch the iPad, and then being on the other end of that communication. Not that I could hear it, but you could tell exactly what was happening up there in the broadcast booth. Please, and you'll remember those reviews, Dan. They didn't last very long at all. Let's make this the standard. Please and thank you.
Yeah, the review's always the contentious thing, right? But yeah, you just get them what they need quickly, get them over with quickly, because a standard that you speak of would actually be really good across the league. I think everyone would agree with that.
I'm sure that's what we're aiming for. And again, it's imperfect. Technology sometimes lets you down, but this was a lot of fun to experience and it worked so well. So, a shout out to that crew in Sudbury for the work that they did. The other opportunity, a much shorter trip, but just earlier today, as we record this on Sunday, January the 5th, in Guelph for the Rangers Storm game. Got to give a stick tap to the Guelph Storm organization. That alternate jersey, their first one they've released in 15 years. That's what the Storm were wearing today. Mostly black. I don't know why they call it crimson. It's burgundy, okay? But you can call it crimson in Guelph if you want to. But the crimson or burgundy bar across the chest with the Storm logo in there, and it's kind of a stylized thing with a lightning bolt and stuff. It looks sweet. So good job on that alternate or third jersey in Guelph. Absolutely loving what they've done there. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, Dan.
Yeah, I watched the game today. It was great. It was actually a sharp looking jersey, and I'm sure you appreciated white lettering as well on the black.
Where were we? I think it was Sarnia. Was that where? It doesn't matter. But yeah, sometimes, please, to all designers, think of the poor broadcast folks. Okay, we got it. We got to be able to read those names. We got to be able to see those numbers. The Rangers did one years ago, and I couldn't pick up. I think it was one of their Remembrance Day ones. They looked great, but the numbers on the shoulders you couldn't see, and or it was difficult to see. And I'm like, I can tell most of them by their skating style because I'm around them all the time, but anyway, think of us. Just give us some outline there and everything. But Guelph did a great job with
Yeah.
those alternate jerseys and absolutely loved what we got to see in the Royal City earlier this afternoon. Again, as we record on a Sunday evening. As I said, we keep our eyes on every market in this league. Dan, are you ready to run around the OHL?
Sure. Why not?
All right. This is something that we call the wraparound. Dan has the Eastern Conference this week. And let's start there, Dan, with you in the East.
All right. Well, we'll talk about this a little later with Barry. They've just reassembled that potent North Bay line of Wakely, Romani, and Van Steensel. That was what they needed because they are probably the best defensive and goaltending team in the East, ready to give a challenge to those London Knights. So look out in Barry.
All right. If we're talking reassembling, maybe in Erie, they somehow have to reassemble their decor because defenseman Matthew Schaefer out for at least 3 months with a broken collarbone suffered during Team Canada's second game at the World Juniors. Schaefer, as you well know, 22 points in 17 games with the Otters this season. And for my money, was working his way back into the conversation for first overall, not just the first rounder, but first overall in June's NHL draft. That is a big blow to the Otters. And I'm sure the organization, Dan, isn't thrilled that they lose Schaefer in a game that he wasn't playing for their team.
Just devastating. Didn't even come back with a gold either. So, and speaking of D and needing that boost on D, well, the Brampton Steelheads have been waiting patiently to get their players back from the World Juniors and from injury. They finally get defensive veteran defenseman Stevie Leskovar back and takes a headshot major on Jimmy Lombardi of Flint and will likely be serving a suspension. But the positive for Brampton is Finn Harding has been money all year, riding his plus 28, nearly a point a game. So he's going to have to ride him for a few more games.
Funny you should mention Jimmy Lombardi and Flint because that's where we are next in the Western Conference here on the wraparound. And how about this? Josh Colosimo waited until his 18th game and then got on the score sheet in a very big way. Colosimo scored his first career goal in game number 18, and he added 3 assists for a 4-point night versus Owen Sound, his first 4 points in the OHL.
It's a colossal game. So yeah,
Colossal from Colossal. Very well done. Very well
thank you,
done.
thank you. Moving to Brantford. So this is kind of my neutral one, Mike, because feels like the Bulldogs have been stuck in neutral most of the year. One lonely 4-game winning streak is the most they've been able to get on the good side of the ledger. It seems to be win 2, lose 2, win 2, lose 2. Coming out of the Christmas break, a big win, big 8-2 win, followed by 3 losses and a win against Ottawa. So they'd like to get that into at least third or fourth gear for a change, Mike.
So in Guelph, where the youth movement is definitely underway, and we'll talk a little bit more about later, goaltender Zach Jovanovski picked up his first career shutout, making 40 saves in the Storm's 2-0 win over Owen Sound. Now, Jovanovski just joined the Storm after starting the season in Junior B with the Air Centennials. And despite the fact, I want to make this clear, even though Jovanovski hails from Tecumseh, which is basically a suburb of Windsor, he is not related to former Spitfires defenseman and first overall NHL pick, Ed Jovanovski. But congratulations to Zach on his first career shutout.
Nice. Moving down to Kingston, a couple players away at the World Juniors, no problem. Kingston is going on record as probably the best, if not one of the top 2 or 3 5-on-5 teams in the league, Mike. You look up and down that roster, all pluses in the plus column, and a huge statement 7-4 win over their rivals in Oshawa after being down 4-1 in that game. So quietly, some really, really good things and strong play happening in Kingston.
Yeah, the Fronts are moving back up the right direction in the standings. In Kitchener, first round pick Evan Hedrick had a home debut to remember with the Rangers. The 15th overall selection in last spring's draft, missed the entire first half of the season with a wrist injury. He joined the Rangers on the road in North Bay, scored in his first game, and then 2 nights later, in front of more than 7,100 fans at the Memorial Auditorium in Kitchener, Hedrick scored again and added an assist. You don't have to like the team, but you got to like the story. And that right there is a great story for the kid's home debut.
Great kid, too. Yeah. Niagara, talk about great stories. They've been a really good story this year, but they're a reminder of how hockey can humble you if you ever show up not ready. Found themselves down 8-0 to the shorthanded London Knights this week. So a little reminder, and then got to follow it up by playing the Windsor Spitfires. Brought that one to overtime before losing. But this game will humble you, Mike, if you're not ready.
Funny you should mention London, Dan, because that's where my eyes are next. And how about goaltender Austin Elliott, who has made a little OHL history with a win over Niagara last Friday night? That's the one that London jumped out to the 8-0 lead during. Elliott became the first OHL goalie in the past 40 years to earn a win in his first 16 starts. Are you kidding me? The Barrie Colts acquired Elliott from the WHL's Saskatoon Blades in a waiver wire acquisition back in October, and then flipped him to the Knights for a 5th and a 14th round pick. I would say those picks are paying big dividends for the London Knights.
Very much so. Yeah. The other end of the spectrum, I've got the North Bay Battalion, who we just noted have moved on some of their veteran players. Going to be a bit of a rough second half of the year, maybe. But having been able to convince their acquisition rider, Callie, to sign after acquiring his rights from Sault Ste. Marie when he failed to report, pointless in his first 5 games, but now the opportunity opens up and starting to find his feet in North Bay, Mike. I'm expecting some point production down the stretch from rider Callie.
In Owen Sound, it's been a tough year. There's no question about it. But how about this for a bright spot? Michael Deck, an 8th round pick of the Attack in 2023 and an NCAA commit to Cornell, made the most of his first OHL game. The 17-year-old forward was in on both Owen Sound goals, scoring once and adding an assist in his Attack debut. Deck had been playing with the St. Andrews College Saints. That's a very clever name there, St. Andrews College, the Saints, before joining Owen Sound. But great debut for Deck in the scenic city of Owen Sound.
Nice. Down the road in Oshawa, we're looking at teams that might have a chance to rival London this year. We already talked about the Barrie Colts. Well, the Oshawa Generals feel they're in that boat. So what's on their Christmas list? You can bet they're going to add. They may have done this by the time this podcast airs. We don't know. But we're hearing rumblings of a potential big shutdown defenseman coming and maybe even adding to the forward ranks too. But Oshawa will add and they will make a run for it.
A team that added and made the run for it last season to win it all, Memorial Cup victors, the Saginaw Spirit, and overage defenseman PJ Forgione has announced an NCAA commitment. He's a native of Novi, Michigan, and he's going to play next season for the University of Vermont. Forgione will play his 200th OHL game this weekend when the Spirit skate in Erie.
Very good. The Ottawa 67s, Mike, been homeless for a while, had to vacate their home for the World Juniors. So 9 straight on the road, of which they only won 3, Mike. So they're going to be very glad to get home. But it's nice to see young, athletic, high-end goaltender Jaden Nelson rebound from a 7-goal outing very strongly in Brantford on Sunday afternoon. Despite an overtime loss, very, very strong effort from him.
It's funny how many times you've touched on something that segues directly into something I'm about to touch on. We don't plan it this way, but when you talk about those homeless Ottawa 67s, I'm now looking at the Sarnia Sting, who have put together a nice little home winning streak, 4 straight, including victories over Kitchener and London for the Sting. And that heater, if you will, extends to a 5-game point streak because the only loss in the past 5 at Progressive Auto Sales Arena is a shootout loss to Brampton. Now, Sarnia had to play 8 in a row on the road earlier this season to make way for the U17s, you'll remember. And now they find themselves in a pretty good position. This 5-game point streak at home, and 16 of the Sting's final 28 games are going to be on home ice, where the team is 9-6-0-3 compared to just 5-13-2-2 on the road. So I guess what I'm saying here is, if you're thinking playoffs, I am talking about playoffs. It's a possibility for the Sting, who are playing very well on home ice.
I have them in the playoffs, Mike, and I'm sticking with it. So,
Okay, I don't, but I think you might be right, Dan.
well, we'll see. But good to see them turning it around. And speaking of turning it around, another segue, Mike, going to Peterborough. I've got 2 positives for them this week. Sunday afternoon, big win in Sudbury, which saw their prize acquisition last year, Nico Addy, who has struggled mightily this year, popped 2 goals with that good shot of his. So maybe he's coming around. And also the signing of 6'7" German defenseman, who we all saw at the World Juniors, Rio Kaiser. So 2 positives in Peterborough this week, Mike.
If you've ever wondered, Dan, if karma is a thing, just ask the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds and their fans. The Hounds have added a new goal horn to GFL Memorial Gardens, and it comes straight from the Agawa Canyon train, which is kind of cool. If you've ever been up there, we ran into some Rangers fans when we made the trip earlier this year, and during their time up in the Sault, they took the Agawa Canyon tour because it's a great tourist thing to do, see the fall colors, etc. However, the first game back from Christmas, when the new goal horn was installed, the Hounds were shut out. So karma, yes, is a thing. Only Peterborough, Owen Sound, and North Bay have scored fewer goals than the Sioux this season. You'll hear it more in the future, but I thought it was kind of funny, not necessarily funny haha for Greyhounds and their fans, that first game, new horn, 0 goals. You didn't get to hear it.
The hockey gods have a sense of humor for sure.
Exactly.
So ending in Sudbury in the East, Mike, and I know we've talked a lot about this guy, and they had a loss on home ice to Peterborough, so things are not great at the end of this weekend. Having said that, I'm going to focus on the positives, which is Kieran Walton's point streak, 18 games. Another streak in that town, Coach Adelic, 6-goal game streak as he returns with a goal, and technically Quentin Musty still has an active goal streak too, even though he's been out at 5 games. So some streaking Wolves, Mike, in Sudbury.
Wait, Quentin Musty still has a goal streak? Did any points that Easton Cowan picked up at the World Juniors count towards his? Come on, what? It's just a question. It's a question that I'm asking here. All right, we'll wrap up the wraparound in Windsor, where the Spits. I think they got new hockey sticks for Christmas or something like that. My goodness, in the 5 games since Christmas, Windsor has scored, or pardon me, it's 6 games now because they played today. 40 goals, 40 goals in their last 6 games. We're talking like 6.5 per. They've scored 4, then 10, 6, 9, 7, and 4 again. They have scored a league high 178 goals on the season. But what a run the Windsor Spitfires are on when it comes to goal scoring.
You know, Mike, they almost score at will. Watching them get down 3-0 in the first 5 minutes to Erie, you blink and it's 3-3, and then you blink and they're up 5-3. So that team can just put it in the net whenever they feel like, it seems.
They certainly can, and they have been doing just that in the 6 games since the Christmas break. Okay, that is something we call the wraparound, keeping our eyes on every market in this league. And it's not the only thing we do on this podcast. The OHL trade deadline is now just days away. Has another OHL team been sold? And our prospects of the week, of course, are still to come on this episode of the OHL podcast. When it's time for the game, it's time for game time. Want to hear some squeak, squeak, swish at the basketball game tonight? Game time. The crack of helmets and shoulder pads at the football game? Game time. Sharp metal on ice and boards shuddering with body checks? Yeah, game time. Download the Game Time app today and get access to all of this and more. concerts, theater, stand-up comedy, it's all on Game Time. When you open the app, just pick the event that you want to see. You'll get a full range of pricing, and don't forget to look for the super deal. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, gets you right to the good stuff so you don't have to waste time sorting through fluff. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code THPN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code THPN for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Dan, it is almost time for the OHL trade deadline. January the 10th, that is this Friday at noon. The OA, overager trade deadline, is the 9th at noon. I'll remind you that as we record, it is Sunday evening, the 5th of January. So by the time this episode comes out on Tuesday morning, because that's when we release to you, there may have been deals made with the World Juniors coming to an end. We know that trade freeze of players over there is obviously lifted, etc. However, as we head towards the deadline, I'll start this way. I see two really intriguing teams, one on each side. In Kitchener, the Rangers are in an almost identical spot as they were a season ago. What was expected to be a rebuild has been anything but. The team is running close to first place in the league. And last year, general manager Mike McKenzie thought, I've got to reward the team for an effort like that. And he added at the deadline. Team went on to finish fourth and lost in the second round of the playoffs. How about the Sudbury Wolves in the East? They loaded last year. They made no bones about the fact they were going for the first championship in franchise history. Loaded up, made their deals, also lost in the second round. The Sudbury Wolves are better this year statistically than they were a season ago. What do you do if you're either of those teams? And then, of course, you already alluded to Oshawa. I don't think they're done. Listen, I don't think London is done personally from where I'm sitting. I think there's a sense in London that there was some unfinished business from last year. They won the OHL championship, but they didn't win the Memorial Cup. Even though they're running in first place, I don't think they want to leave anything to chance if they can help it. So I'm expecting Oshawa. I'm expecting London. I'm super curious about Kitchener and Sudbury. And we know the youth movement is underway in Guelph, and North Bay has already signaled and made its moves. It is definitely selling this year. What are you seeing when you look ahead to the trade deadline, Dan?
Yeah, you raised a couple of really interesting cases, Mike, because when I looked at the start of the year who I expected to be sellers, both Kitchener and Sudbury were in there. And I felt like it was still probably the smarter move long term for Kitchener to remain that way. Unfortunately, when you have a record like they're running right now, it's hard to sell anyone, hey, we're giving up, we're waving the white flag. So I'm not sure they're going to sell Mike. I still think I'd lean towards a soft sell of a couple of those assets that could bring you a lot for next year to build around that strong 2007 2008 core they've got when they're looking to bid for a Memorial Cup. But I don't actually think that's what they're going to do based on where they're currently sitting, and it's a bit of a gamble because you, like you said, you're running up against London. Sudbury, very different case. So the way they've been rolling, they're scoring pretty much at will as well. And their record puts them firmly in the mix, and they've got a few older players that are not going to be back next year. So that's a really tough call there too. But I expect they might try and play the field this year too and see where they can get, because you've got an arms race in the East. We expected Brantford and Brampton both to load up this year. Almost have to in Brampton based on the composition of their roster and what they're trying to accomplish this year. So those are teams that are not doing that well in the standings right now that are probably going to be buyers. Barry's already bought. We know Oshawa's going to buy. We know Ottawa is probably going to sell. And then you've got only a couple sellers, firm sellers throughout the league. So it could be a seller's market to the Eastern teams. But in the West, what concerns me is how many teams are going to look at London and say, yeah, I think we've got a shot here. You hate to see teams wave the white flag, but I don't think a lot of teams in the West are feeling too confident about buying right now.
I'll grant that's a fair point, but I hope, and look, you're not in this business to roll over just because the other team has a better team on paper, right? There's no question. And even on the ice, London has proven its superiority. Everybody gets it. Okay. But please, somebody in the West, and I'm looking at you, Windsor. I still think Saginaw's a somewhat interesting case. A lot of people have been talking about the Spirit running it back again this year. And when you've got the likes of Misa and Perek, how do you not try to do it again? But I don't know. They've got a longer or a bigger hill to climb. But Windsor might tinker around the edges. I don't know. Or maybe you look at it, and in the case of Kitchener, I don't think there's an argument, Dan, that Jackson Parsons right now, the way he has played through half the season, and I even mentioned Austin Elliott in the wraparound earlier in this episode, and 16 wins in 16 starts, the first goaltender in the OHL to do that in 40 years. But I think Parsons is the best goaltender in the league right now. Maybe if you're Kitchener, you're thinking doing nothing is like doing something, and you just run this team out there and think that maybe your goaltender is better than the other goaltender, and over 7 games you can win 4 of them. I don't know, but I'm hoping that it's not just conceding to a very strong London team in the West.
I 100% agree with you on that one, Mike. You don't want anyone to roll over. That's not what we're here for. That's not what anyone's here for. London's going to be strong pretty much every year. So are you going to roll over every year? I'll take it a step further with the Kitchener Rangers, Mike, and I'll say that biases, accuse me as you will, Jackson Parsons is hands down the best goaltender in this league. And I think there's pros and cons to that right now. It can make you feel like your team is maybe a little bit better than they actually are. So if anything were to happen where he didn't maintain this level of play or the team gets exposed, then maybe they get exposed quickly. I'm not saying it's not a good team, but that's how good Jackson Parsons has been. But when you have a goalie like that, Mike, like you're kind of alluding to, who knows? You get a brick wall in there and you can beat a lot of teams, and that team is not giving up more than 2 or 3 goals a game almost ever. And that speaks to just playoff success usually. So I think you're right. I think you might see kind of a stand patish approach in Kitchener and just see how far that goaltending can take you. But you're right. I don't want to see anyone rolled over and just anoint London. Heck, maybe some of them should bring in the Czechia schemers, the Czechia strategists, and see if you can make some of those London Knights look kind of invincible, Mike.
Yeah, Dickinson, Bonk, Cowan, unsuccessful with Team Canada this year. And just one more point on Parsons and the Kitchener Rangers generally. Game 2 of the season for the Kitchener Rangers in Windsor, when the team was battling food poisoning, a virus, whatever, they were sick as dogs, and they lost the game 12-2. Even with that 12 against them in one game, the Kitchener Rangers have by far allowed the fewest goals in the entire Ontario Hockey League this season. Just something else to keep in mind. I want to go back to what you were saying about Sudbury, Dan, and it sounds to me like you're thinking Rob Papineau has got to be thinking of making additions to the team given the current composition of the roster and where the team is at in the standings. What I'm trying to wrap my head around, and we talked about this, if we go back to our preseason predictions, even though predictions are a mug's game and only fools make them, but it looked like the balance of power this year was going to be in the East, right? The Oshawa Generals, maybe a year ahead of schedule, ran all the way to the OHL final last year. And much like London with some unfinished business, set the tone early, said, this is what we expect. So Oshawa was there. Brampton loaded up, making that Rakoff deal in the offseason. We know all about their offense despite the record this year and what's gone wrong. We thought Barrie was kind of on the outside of that big group of 4, and the Brantford Bulldogs were in there. 4 strong teams. Now, yes, Sudbury for sure. Niagara is right in there. We talked about Kingston during the wraparound, how well they're doing right now. I think I've just listed 7 of 10 teams in the East. Only one gets to win, Dan. So somebody on the Eastern side has got to blink, don't they? And by that I mean swallow hard and say, we're going to let the others fight it out this year, and we're going to take a more cautious approach, if you will.
Well, I think some are going to have others blink for them based on the fact they just don't have the assets in the cupboard to get who they need to get. So you might see Sudbury just kind of roll it with what they've got, knowing they don't have the assets to further deplete the cupboard, but we've got a decent team. We could upset someone. Niagara, I know you've got a team there that is set up quite well for next year. So do you really want to blow up too much of that really strong foundation for next year to try and roll this year? They got some tough decisions. And then I look at teams, Mike, another team that's really interesting to me, and I wouldn't want to be Dave Brown, is what do you do in Erie? I mean, Erie is loaded for this year, really. I mean, you look at the age composition of the roster, they've got a lot going for them, but now they've got the injury to Matthew Schaefer to worry about. How and when does he come back? You look at, their performance has just been okay. It hasn't been great. They've kind of been having their lunch handed to them by the teams ahead of them in the standings. So what signal is that telling them? Because it's really not a sell year for them based on how they're designed, but is it there for them to go all in? So there's a few teams when you look at it, Mike, I'm kind of glad I'm not a GM this year.
I'm glad I'm not a GM every year. Being an armchair GM is so much more fun. And by the way, any OHL season without at least a dozen Niagara trades is a boring OHL season. Okay. So let's go, Niagara. We're counting on you for at least 6 or 7 more this year.
They
Okay.
won't disappoint, Mike. They won't
They will
disappoint.
not. Of course not. Of course not. We will break down all of the trades on next week's episode because, of course, it will all have been done and the dust has settled by then. And we'll look at uh, what the league looks like through our eyes by that point. But it's going to be very interesting in some markets. I think Erie's a great example that I had kind of glossed over, Dan. Sudbury, Kitchener, and then the arms race. I don't think Oshawa's done yet. I don't think London's done yet. And coming into the season, those were the teams on either side that people thought might be there when all was said and done. And Brampton, I don't think you can be done yet either, the way things have gone. So some addresses will be changed in the hours ahead of this recording, and we'll break it all down on next week's episode. But remember, Thursday at noon is the OA trade deadline. Friday at noon is the league's trade deadline. A note from Josh Brown of the Waterloo Region Record that caught both of our attention, Dan. The Brantford Bulldogs sold Michael Andlauer, selling the Bulldogs to a Toronto family. I'll add to that with NHL ties, but history in hockey. But interesting that Mr. Andlauer, who also owns the Belleville and Ottawa Senators, the AHL and NHL teams, is getting out of the OHL business after owning for quite a while.
Yeah, this was something that I started hearing whispers about probably about a year ago, Mike, after the sale of the Ottawa Senators was approved, and there was kind of this sense, rumblings around Michael Andlauer that there would be a bit of a transition, and how Michael Andlauer was really committed to the Brantford community and making sure they were set up well and in good hands, but that the torch might be passed at some point because it's really hard to do both those things well. So I think this is not completely shocking. I think this is all part of his process to ensure that that organization's in good hands. So it looks like that's what's going to happen, and you have to ask yourself on ice: does this cease the pipeline that saw overtime hero Tomasz Hamara return as an Ottawa Senators prospect? Will that end for Brantford? Because some of these players who could probably have played in the AHL have returned as overagers lately. So we'll see how this affects them on ice.
I think it's a great point, Dan, on the pipeline. And as nice as it is, not every team has that. And yes, the Hammer return. And I always thought that there was a pretty good possibility that Jay McKee, who's the head coach in Brantford, would work his way up through those ranks as well, ultimately to a pro job. Who knows? And that could still happen. I think Michael Andlauer has proven himself over the years to be a pretty loyal guy. But more than anything, I think the unfortunate part, and I don't know enough about the potential new owner to say with any certainty what kind of an owner they become, but we do know what kind of an owner Michael Andlauer is. And Michael Andlauer is exactly the kind of owner that you want to have in your league. And so that's just a loss for the league in general. I remember our trip to Brantford last season wasn't too long after Andlauer consummated the deal for the Ottawa Senators. And he was there in Brantford on a Saturday night watching his Bulldogs play when the Senators were playing in Ottawa. So you own an NHL team, and instead of being there, no disrespect to Brantford, but in the capital of Canada, in an NHL arena watching your NHL team, you're in the Civic Center in Brantford watching your OHL team. But I just think he's the kind of owner that any league would be proud to boast as among its membership. And losing Michael Andlauer as an owner in the league is something that I think is disappointing. I mean, it's his choice, it's his money, it's his life, and I understand he wants to spend more time with family, the grandkids, etc. It's not like he's selling the Ottawa Senators, but maybe they'll have more fun in the box at the Sens games. I don't know.
Yeah, but to that point, Mike, if you look at comments he's made about owning the Ottawa Senators and making sure that he's going to keep ticket prices affordable and the experience, so his heart seems to be in the right place with all of these things. And I don't think this is a transaction where he would have been necessarily looking to make the absolute top dollar. I think he probably sought out owners that he believes are right for the community and will kind of carry on in his tradition. So I think that's the type of owner he was. So I think that he probably will have left this in good hands.
I hope you are right about that. We are expecting some sort of official announcement in and around January the 15th when the Prospects game is played in Brantford. So keep your ears peeled for that. But thanks to Josh Brown at the Waterloo Region Record for dropping the tidbit more officially in recent days. Okay, before we wrap up, something we always like to do as part of our podcast is a prospect that has caught our eyes. This is somebody that's eligible for the draft in June. I have to get used to saying this June now, Dan, because we've turned the calendar to 2025. Who is your prospect this week?
Well, I got to give a huge shout out to Barry goaltender Ben Horevic, Mike. Quietly, so here's a kid that playing behind World Junior caliber Sam Hillebrand, who played for the U.S. Phenomenal goalie. You're kind of hidden behind him. He goes away to the World Juniors. You get your opportunity. So what do? Posting a 12-3 right now, second in the league, 2.2 on goals against, league leading 936 save percentage. This is a kid that has just come out into the spotlight and proven everyone that he's a top end goalie in this league. So it's an embarrassment of riches for Barry, but a lot of kudos this week for Ben Horevic, Mike.
You read my mind and said my words. I was about to say the exact same thing. An embarrassment of riches. Hildebrandt and Horebic now in Barrie. And look, we already talked about the Colts have added already. They're not going away quietly. They lead the East as we talk on this Sunday night, and they will be a force. There's no question about it. Show me a good goaltender, I'll show you a good coach. Show me a good goaltender, I'll show you a championship team. So the Colts are definitely right there. That's a hell of a tandem they've got. For me, acknowledging a couple of things, this is a 19-year-old player, and he gets to play with a guy named Misa, but I don't think you can overlook what Christian Epperson has done of late with the Saginaw Spirit. Rated a C prospect by NHL Central Scouting, but he has been absolutely dynamite of late, including his 4-point game on Saturday. That gives Epperson 7 points, 3 goals, and 4 assists in just his past 2 games. Been a model of consistency as well. 16 of his 33 games have been multi-point games. He is tied for the league lead in shorthanded goals with 3, and his plus 30, yes, a plus 30 rating is 4th best in the OHL. So my prospect this week is Christian Epperson of the Saginaw Spirit.
Good call, Mike. And one of the reasons why I don't think Saginaw should sell, I think there's enough there to run it back and see what they can do because they've got some high end players. And Epperson this year, again, coming out from the shadows, everyone knew it was there based on his hockey past. He figured out how to put it in the net in the OHL this year. And now you've got another elite player in Saginaw. So great choice.
We already acknowledged that we wouldn't want to be GMs in this league, but it sure is fun being the armchair GM. It's fun being a fan. And we've got a big week ahead when we watch what happens coming up to that trade deadline, and we'll break it all down next week. A reminder, please do, if you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel or to the podcast itself, make sure you do that. That means you're going to get immediate access every time something is uploaded. We're working on some new things on the YouTube channel, including something called Moose Tracks. The Rangers bus driver's nickname is Moose. Thought it would be fun to shoot some video content with him while we're on the road, get a perspective from the driver's seat, so to speak. So you'll find that on the YouTube channel and all kinds of fun stuff all over the place. In fact, I ran into Andy Paquette, who's Charlie Paquette's father, in Guelph today. Andy used to play in this league, and he was a former guest with his brother Daryl on the OHL podcast. If you go back in the audio files, you'll find the episode with Andy and Daryl Paquette. They were hilarious. Lots of fun talking to them. So listen, all I'm saying is lots of reason to subscribe, listen, watch. The content is always being updated. And tell a friend about it too, because if you want OHL information and entertainment from a couple of armchair GMs, we are those armchair GMs. Fair assessment, Dan Mahar?
Well, yeah, and have fun telling us how stupid we are too with some of our opinions. I can't wait to hear my logo choices. So yeah, just have at it.
Recapping again, Dan Mahar's three favorite logos from 3 to 1. The Windsor Spitfires at number 3, the Sudbury Wolves at number 2, the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds at number 1. And an honorable mention for the Sarnia Sting? No, the Belleville Wolves back in the day, right?
And even Flint, I got to throw like a couple honorable mentions in there. So
All right. Let Dan know what you think of his selections. You'll find him on Twitter at his name, at Dan Mahar. Sorry, that's X now, but you know what it is. I'm at Farwell_OHL on the X machine, and you can email us anytime. OHL podcast at Rogers.com. We will break down the trades that were and the season ahead on our next episode, which comes out one Tuesday from now. Here, this is the OHL podcast.